What's up, YouTube? Today's video is going to be a banger because it's gonna be the answer, or not really an answer, but an analysis into one of my most asked questions on stream: Raider or Berserker for Lightning Strike. Now I'm gonna try to provide you with a pretty detailed breakdown where I'm not gonna be really biased about it. Of course, I can just say Raider does a lot less damage than Berserker, but that's just not gonna be fair, right? You have to go look at some POBs, go look at some facts, and let's see which one actually wins out in the end. And yeah, so before I do that, I'm gonna go over my gear real fast because this is kind of a build diary still, and every single day I do make some upgrades, and today was actually a day with some meaningful upgrades, and it's always nice to see the character progressing in some way. So let's get straight into it. So currently I have 2 claws. I did get this 1 claw made because someone actually bought it for me and I have to pay them back. I think this claw costs around 66 exalts total to make. Now this claw here, I'm trying to sell it to pay them back, but basically the difference between these 2 claws is this ashling here did not hit the prefix and hit a suffix unveil for crit multi, which is not bad, but that's 13% pen gone, and I YOLO exalted crit chance onto it. Now this claw here, the new one, is both T1 cold and T1 fire. So this one here is slightly lower. You can see here the fire damage is a lot higher on this claw. Wait. Wow, that's actually a pretty big difference. T2 fire and T1 fire is pretty huge. Now this one's actually even better because this is Essence cold, and Essence cold turns out to be a lot worse than T1 cold. So this one here is actually Essence fire and T1 cold, which is ideally what you want to do. And this one here is Essence cold and T2 fire. So this claw actually ends up being around 8 to 9% more damage on the POB, which is pretty crazy. And this can actually be fixed to get a higher crit multi. I think this claw currently has T3 multi, which is not too bad, but I could definitely fix it. I could also use Lucky Suffix Divine to get a higher crit multi, but at this point it seems good enough. The prefix divines are pretty good, so I'm just going to keep it the way it is for now. So I need to sell off this claw to pay back the person. Now basically the reason why I wanted this claw also is because it has strength and int. This is one of the new crafts they added into PoE, which is crit chance and strength and int. Usually if you're making a fizz weapon, you would get crit chance and quality, but this is pretty good. So this claw, huge DPS upgrade. I actually can't put it in until, yeah, there we go. So our helm has finally been delivered from the lab service, which is pretty crazy. It took him 3 days, which just goes to show you how long lab services actually take because there's just so many enchants, right? So this helm, I YOLO exalted 35% cold res onto, so it has life, 35% cold res, and then fire and chaos res, which is not too shabby. So it could be a lot better, but it does have a good chunk of resist, and it also allows me to craft fire and chaos res. So I'm pretty satisfied with it. Now the reason we have this helm is it gives you 3% pen. It also gives you a large chunk of increased elemental damage, and it also has nearby enemies take 9% increased elemental damage, making this helm, I think this one helm was probably a 15-20% DPS increase. And this also gives you Berserk has 30% increased buff effect, along with the flat cold damage. And the flat cold damage helps out a lot for brittle on bosses, so it's super good. And even with this cold damage, we do not mess up our Trinity, and you can pretty much proc Trinity instantly. It turns out that proccing Trinity instantly is more of a factor of how fast you attack. The faster you attack, the faster you'll be able to put up Trinity, and it actually makes a huge difference. Now, I actually took a huge gamble today on this amulet. This amulet, I decided to divine it, and I did get a slightly higher chaos res. So this amulet actually ended up being a net benefit to divine. It was kind of risky. I used like 30 divines. I kind of got scared, so I decided to keep this roll. So I'm pretty satisfied with this roll. I might one day try divining it again in the future when I have a lot more currency, but overall, it's probably suicidal to divine because this is actually a pretty good roll minus the cold res. Now, in order to fix resist, now this is pretty much one of the big benefits of Scourge League. And Scourge League is pretty much treated as use the Scourge items to get resist on your uniques. And this is pretty much exactly what I'm doing. I got rid of my old Red Blade banner, which had a corrupt instead of a life implicit. So I got 29 life back on it, and then I got 23 fire res. And the implicit that gives 26% increased extra damage from crits doesn't really matter because the brass dome makes it so that we're unable to be crit. So right here, this implicit pretty much, the Scourge pretty much just gives us 23% fire res. Now in the future, if you wanted to get more resist, you could potentially Scourge the brass dome and have 3 tries at it. So that's something that's a little bit more endgame. Now here we have the Mark of the Elder Raid. Now this is another item that I pretty much got resist on. So it has a downside of reduced mana regeneration rate, but I pretty much don't care about that. So here we have 25% cold res, 23% fire res. That helps out because our previous helm actually had a lot of resist on it. Now this ring here, I could probably recraft for something better. What you could do is you can get the suffixes, and then you can probably do suffixes cannot be changed, and then do Veiled Chaos Orb and try to get life or something like that. But at this point in time, I'm pretty satisfied with this ring. I will probably try to recraft something better and try to get a level 12 Assassin's Mark on it, and to get the flat unveiled damage, which is actually a huge DPS boost. Now, same thing with this gloves. This gloves I will probably recraft in the coming days as I get more currency. The veiled mod for Ashling on the spike gloves is actually pretty crazy, and you can actually get up to, I think, 30% increased elemental damage. Let me show you guys. This is like one of the ideal pair of gloves, and you can see that they have this node or this mod here that says 30% increased elemental damage if you dealt a critical strike recently. And this is actually a pretty easy mod to get if you do prefixes cannot be changed and use a Veiled Chaos Orb. So as you can see, I did make a lot of upgrades today, but there's still a lot of upgrades to go. And as crazy as that is to say, because I have been playing this build for nearly 2 weeks now. Because I think the leak has actually been out for... Actually, the leak's been out for like over 2 weeks now. So new league is almost upon us, right? But anyhow, let's get straight into the meat of the discussion, which is Raider versus Berserker, and what are the actual differences. Okay, so here we go. Is the age-old question, Berserker versus Raider. And Berserker, I'm going to go over the pros and cons of each of the classes. Berserker Pro, roughly 2 to 3x the damage of Raider. Now, the damage difference can be less than 2x if you have top of the line endgame gear, but this is gear that most of you guys will not have. This is with like a Forbidden Shaco with Ice Bite 35 and Multi Strike on it, or Hypothermia, or some other really good one on top of Ice Bite. So Berserker just gets a lot more damage for free, and you might be wondering, where does the damage come from? So you scale in the end game because you have 2 more multipliers attached to your Ascendancy, which is 40% more damage and 40% more attack speed. And because of this means that your end game scaling is just insane because everything scales off of more multipliers. This node right here is 40% more damage, right? You take this node, you can already see it's plus 40% damage. And here, this node is 2% more attack speed per blitz charge, and this ends up being 40% more attack speed once you count for the 20 maximum blitz charge that you can have. So already there is 2 huge more multipliers for scaling your endgame damage. And anyone who knows PoE knows that more multipliers is the best way of scaling damage. This is why people go low life in Delve, because of 30% more spell damage. So Berserker has not 1, but 2 40% more damage multipliers, or 40% more attack speed multipliers. And this next thing is Berserker is able to maintain nearly 70% uptime on Berserk. And that is actually crazy because Berserk is actually another more multiplier. Now, a lot of people ask me, how do you actually generate rage on Berserker? So you can see here, Berserk is actually a more attack speed multiplier, a less damage taken multiplier, a more damage multiplier, and a more move speed multiplier. Now, if you're wondering why Berserker just blows Raider out of the water in terms of move speed, attack speed, and endgame damage, this is why. Stacking more multipliers. It's like multiplying one thing on top of another. That's how you get numbers that are much, much higher. It's like 2 times 2 is 4. So you get double damage, right? It's not as simple as that. But you can see here, why is Berserker able to sustain Berserk so easily? So Warbringer makes it so that your War Cries sacrifice or grant you 10 rage per 5 power if you have less than 25 rage. With the Red Blade Banner, this makes our War Cries have infinite power. So whenever we War Cry, we get maximum rage. So right now, when we play, we press Berserk. The what's it called? The rage slowly drains down, and then we War Cry again, and then So you can see here, we are Berserk the full amount of time, and it lasts for quite a while.
I cannot do this
right?
yet.
So you are able to maintain Berserk for quite literally almost an eternity, and then you have the cooldown of Berserk to go up, and then you can immediately start Berserking again. And during this time, you're taking more, you have more attack speed, less damage taken, and more move speed. And this is further scaled by the 30% increased buff effect from our helm. So that's pretty much a huge benefit of being a Berserker. The Berserker is able to Berserk. So what does that lead to? That leads to Berserker attacking up to 23 times per second because you have two more multipliers with the more attack speed from Blitz charges and then the more attack speed from Berserk. So this is why when you look at a Raider POB, this is one of the top Raider POBs. This is actually the highest DPS Raider that I could find on POENINJA. And this is with everything checked. It's at 36.7 million. And it attacks 8.84 times per second. The fastest raiders can probably get around 13 times per second if you use multi-strike. So being able to attack 23 times per second compared to the maximum 13 times per second, this means that you get a lot more leech. That means every single time you attack with your claws, you're pretty much able to leech around 1,000 plus life per second on a Berserker because you attack so fast. And that's just a huge survivability increase, because as long as you're not stunned and you don't get one-shotted, you're pretty much able to almost instantly heal up your entire life pool. And lastly, Berserker gets access to Fortify, maximum resist, and damage reduction from Berserk. So like I said earlier, Berserk is a damage reduction thing, and Berserker gets access to Fortify because you can take this node here, melee hits Fortify. If you look at the Ranger tree, it's pretty hard to get the Fortify node. The Fortify node is way over here, I think. And their tree is not really that suitable for it. So you can see this guy's tree, it's kind of a lot of points. You have to spend 3 or 4 travel points to get there. But you could technically do it, but it's not very common on Raider builds. And then you also get maximum resist. Now the maximum resist is over here that we're able to get. And Raider is just kind of far away from it, and there's really no way to get max res. You can get the max res over here, but that's actually an insane investment for most Raiders. So that's pretty much sums up the big pros. Now the cons is it's hard to play for a beginner due to needing to use Withering Step and Berserk on cooldown. So pretty much when you play the game on Berserker, you almost have to press D and W, which is Berserk and Withering Step, as often as possible. Now the reason behind that is you want to have your Berserk almost fully up the entire time. Technically you don't need to spam Berserk, and you can just keep an eye on when the Berserk is ready to go and where you need to press it again. But the Withering Step is something you need to spam on cooldown. And that's not too bad. Some people can macro it. Some people can just hold down the button or something like that. So it's not exactly the end of the world. But most Raiders, when they play the game, they don't need to have General's Cry on left click because they don't want to generate rage all the time. So they can pretty much just have Withering Step and just play with left click Withering Step, which is super simple, right? So it's not really like a big deal. Now the reason you want to use Withering Step is because it grants you the elusive buff, and it keeps your elusive at a high effect the entire time. So the cons is it's definitely not a super easy build to play for beginners, because you need to keep track of using your Withering Step and Berserk. But if you just keep spamming the buttons, you'll be fine. But some people don't like having that extra APM. And in addition, Berserker is a build you can massively fuck up on a single target. So you can see here my damage is what? 208k. So if you put down your totems and then you get Berserk up. So let's put down the totems. Here you see the totems down is 345k. Getting max rage brings it up to 514k. Pressing Berserk brings it up to 830k. So you have quadruple damage. Now in order to get this damage, you can pretty much keep this damage up for a long time in the boss fight. It's not like this is conditional damage that appears once. It's something that you can maintain for a long time. So you can see it's still at 800k. But the problem is you actually have to be able to remember to put down your totems. You have to remember to press Berserk. And you need to remember to move around a little bit to maintain General's Cry to keep your rage at high. And you also have to keep track if your rage is at under 20 so that you can press General's Cry to bring it back up to 50. There's a lot of micromanagement, but that's part of the reason why the skill does so much damage on Berserker, is because GGG likes to reward people having an active playstyle by giving more damage. That's why slams have been broken for so long of Earthshatter, because pressing more buttons and having a more involved playstyle will reward you according to GGG's eyes. So the con is it's harder to access 100% spell suppression. Raider over here has 40% for free when they take this no Quartz Infusion. Also means that they get easy access to phasing. And Berserker has an impossible time to get alternate ailment immune for Simulacrum. Now, even though I say that you get 50% chance to avoid elemental ailments while phasing, the fact of the matter is most raiders, when they play the build, they don't actually go for the ailment immunity. So even though this is a con, most raiders profile do not actually get ailment immunity. So I don't really know how big of a con this is, because most people are out for a Pharaoh's Fur or some other chess piece. And usually you get ailment immunity by taking these nodes down here, and then you craft on one thing on your piece of gear. So this person never crafted it on. Oh yeah, he actually has ailment immunity, so he gets it on his shield. So you can get ailment immunity really easily on the Raider that you just can't really do it on the Berserker. You can get the ailment immunity that matters on the Berserker though, because you get freeze immune here, you get chill immune on the boots, and you get shock immune with this Pantheon, and then reduced effect craft on either your ring, gloves, or helm. So it's not very hard to get the immunity to the ailments that matter. But alternate ailments for Simulacrum is pretty hard. We're able to get Brittle immune because we can't be crit, so it doesn't matter that the mobs have extra crit chance. Scorch you can deal with by being overcapped on res and having endurance charges up. And Sap doesn't really matter too much because we do 20% more damage than the Raiders anyhow. So taking 20% less damage from Sap is not really a big deal. So next part, Berserker has harder time to gear for resist due to needing to use a unique shield. So Replay Banner is pretty much mandatory on Berserker, which means that this shield cannot have any resist on it besides the Scourge implicit mod. Now it's actually not as bad as you think it is, but you can see here, well, this Berserker doesn't even have any damage, any resist on it. So I guess this might not be the best point ever, but you can see here, this item does not have any resist. And then this item does not have any resist that we use. So technically, it's harder to get resist, but for some Raider profiles, they use Pharaoh's Fur anyhow, and they use a shield with no resist. So kind of an interesting con, not really the perfect con, but it is mitigated by Scourge. And another con for Berserker is it's more of a high level tree. So in the low 90s, the tree won't be as good. So if you can look at my profile, the reason why Berserker is not as great of a pathing for the tree, leading it to being harder to level, is because you have to travel so far to get to the juicy claw nodes and the claw mastery to get the, elusive stuff, and to get this elusive effect over here to get the crit mastery. So you can see a lot of the juicy damage stuff is all the way over here, and we do have to travel quite a ways to get to those points. So it is harder to level, and you do need to be a higher level to be able to use a cluster than being a Raider. And I do think that's an important con to notice, is that it is a lot harder to league start this in an SSF setting. And it does require like level 90, like mid 90s before it starts feeling really good on how your tree looks. And this is another huge con that people mention. And the thing is, Berserker cannot shock, freeze, and shatter because we utilize Secrets of Suffering. And the main reason why I utilize Secrets of Suffering is because it's a lot harder to cap out on crit on a Berserker because we have Blitz charges, which means that we get 160% reduced critical strike chance. Now, you could still technically cap out your crit, but Secrets of Suffering just ends up being too strong. If you take into account you get 30 Scorch on the enemy, 30 Scorch is pretty much equivalent to 40 Shock. A 40 effect of shock when I tried it out on the profiles. So Secrets of Suffering is just too good to pass up. Now what this means is that we are not able to shock, freeze, or shatter, but that's not really a huge issue if the mobs are dying instantly, but it's just something to keep in mind. Now I'm going to go over the Raider pros real fast. I mean, they're pretty much going to be really similar because the Berserker pros are the Raiders cons and the Berserker's cons are the Raider pros. I'm just going to go through it real fast. Raider is much easier to play. You're able to inflict ailments like shock, freeze, and shatter. You can get 100% spell suppression easily. You have easy ailment immunity and phasing. You have easier leveling at league starts as SSF. You can go Shaco, which is a cool item. You have a smaller character model, which is a female. You have easy access to a lot of evasion percent because of this node over here that gives you evasion rating per frenzy charge. And you have free frenzy charge generation on bosses, and you don't need to worry about using a flask or something to inflict exposure. Now the big cons for Raider are you do a half or to a third the damage to Berserker can do, but it's enough to do all content. Like 20 mil or 30 mil, or whatever this tool, whatever the POB is enough to do all content. Now this is a super, what's it called, POB warriored out POB. Like I gave it every single thing that it could possibly hope for. 45 shock, chill, ignite, everything, right? And I gave him every single thing: onslaught, leeching, flask active, power, frenzy charges, 130 points, 36 mil, right? And we're gonna look at some POBs after this real fast. But the damage is enough to do all content. Now on a like the top end gear level though, the Raider will have a hard time to even do a half of the damage of a Berserker, or even a third of the damage of a top tier Berserker. And that's just the way it is because of the way the more damage multipliers scale. Your attack speed is a lot slower, leading to a lower leech rate with life gain on hit. Your slower move speed because of no Berserk. You can see here the move speed on this profile is actually 280%, but this is from someone who stacks a bunch of frenzy charges. And I'm not sure if I get this person Berserk, but you can see Raider does have pretty high move speed, but not having Berserk means that you kind of move slower just because of your lower like attack speed with Whirling Blades. And then you have no easy access to Fortify, Berserk, or Rage. If anyone's ever played with Rage or Berserk, you will know the huge difference it is to have near access, near perma Berserk uptime. And it's just something you have to try to believe. And it's super expensive to go super endgame because you need the Frenzy Charge, Implicit Ring, and Shield. So this build over here actually probably costs more than my build. It has a Forbidden Shaco with Ice Bite and crit damage. And then it also has a +1 Frenzy Charge Shield. And yeah, and +1 Frenzy Charge Ring, which are probably both hundreds of exalts. And if you go Shaco, you must use Paradoxica to really optimize the damage. So this profile, even though it seems pretty good, is using Paradoxica because Paradoxica is what scales Shaco super well. And if you use Paradoxica, that means you can't use Nightblade and you don't have the free elusive effect. And it actually makes a pretty big difference. And you can't use a claw, most importantly, which means that your leech is cut down by a lot. So when you go Shaco, you pretty much have to use a Paradoxica, which means that you're not using a claw, which is not a good thing because of how OP the Nightblade support gem is. But now let's go look at some Raider versus Berserker POB real fast before we wrap up the discussion. So this is the #1 Raider profile, and this guy has pretty good gear. He probably has too many points. So if I take out some of these like cheating points, because no one really has 127 points, right? So let's take out these nodes. These are the ones they usually don't take. So right here you can see the POB is around 31.3 million. This is pretty much with everything up. And I'm assuming this guy uses a Lethal Pride. No. I just gave him Intimidate. I'm not really sure if he has Intimidate. But Intimidate, 45 shock, everything checked. Bleeding, power charges, frenzy charges, cat stealth, cat's agility, onslaught, phasing, tailwind, leeching, flask active, consecrated ground. I don't think I can check anything else. You know, we might as well give him adrenaline. Why not? Adrenaline's a pretty good thing. Do you have endurance charge? Let's just check this. Unholy might, let's check that. Blinded, nah, that lowers the DPS. Frozen, nah. Crit recently, yeah, let's do that. Killed recently. Banner Planet, yeah, let's put that. Effective chill, let's put it at 1000. Why not? Doom on Hex, 1000. Yeah, so let's put the shock at 50. That's probably even better. Crit chance lucky, why not? Enemy moving, yeah. Let me check that, check that, check that. Check everything here, check that. Let's give him negative resist. Why not? Negative 20 fire res, negative 20 cold res. Yeah, negative 20 lightning res sounds pretty good too. Let's just make it negative 100 actually. Maybe negative, yeah, negative 40 maybe. Okay. So after a lot of like popping out right here, I'm able to finally make the Raider profile do the same damage as the Berserker profile. And this is just a little bit of config issues, but it's at 54 million now. So you can see here, two profiles are pretty similar. I'm going to show you the Berserker profile. It has around 48k armor, has a good chunk of move speed, has the spell suppression, but doesn't have the max res, has negative chaos res. And you can see the calcs here. Pretty tanky against everything. So pretty similar, right? So now let's look at the Berserker profile. So this is the #1 Raider, and I think he was #1 by a lot. This is the Berserker profile, 54.9 mil, so it's around the same, 4.9k life, has around 50k armor, 272% move speed, around the same. But then here he has 84, 83, 83 res, and 75 chaos res. Now the max res kind of gets canceled out by the spell suppression, but spell suppression doesn't really work for additional LE damage with on like fizz hits or something like that on attacks. So it's kind of a wash whether like you want the max res or you want the spell suppression. But you have 75% chaos res because it's a Zeri's promise. And then you can see here the stats are kind of similar, and that's just a chaos res because this guy has better gear in terms of gearing. But both of these people have the best of the best, and you can see the damage is kind of similar if you take every single damage note on the tree for Raider, right? Or if you change the POB out for everything. So it's possible to maybe reach the same, but you would have to tick a lot of boxes and you would have to do a lot of crazy things. Now, it's not like this profile is not that tool tipped out. I mean, obviously it doesn't have adrenaline and stuff like that. Like I checked, I didn't lower the resist. But roughly on average, I think at the top end, Berserker will still do roughly almost like 1.6, 1.7 times the damage if you make the POBs actually fair. And because the other guy's POB, I think when I did it was around actually like 31 mil without like actually cheating by that much. And this is the person's POB that I looked at, Nang Scourge. This guy's a pretty good gear, right? 20 mil, he was by far the best that I saw. So when you take the POB and you look at it for Raiders, you usually control V it. So this POB is 54 mil, and this one was 22. But as I said before, if I wasn't trolling and doing what I was doing, so you have Onslaught usually, you have Phasing, you have Tailwind. Adrenaline is not something you have. I don't think you have Leeching because they don't have Glorious Vanity for Overleech. And none of this other stuff should be checked. Cat Stealth, Cat's Agility should be checked. Intimidate, this guy doesn't have a Lethal Pride here, so he doesn't really have Intimidate. Right? He doesn't really have Intimidate. So I'm just going through this so you can see how you could actually configure the POB. Shock is probably like 35, I think, on bosses if you get there. And then everything else, you don't really have anything to do. So you can see here the POB is around 32 mil. And that's not too bad, right? But it's still a far cry from the POB of the Berserker with like 54 mil with the same configs. And that's just the difference between the two classes. Is not to say one class is better or the other is just one class actually does more damage, objectively speaking, based on the having the best gear and having like near max level. And that's just how it is, but it doesn't mean that Raider is bad. So now let's see what conclusions we can draw from all of this. Oh yeah, I wanted to mention one more thing. I feel like a lot of the reason why we have all of this discussion about which class ends up being better is probably, and why people think Raider does more damage is pretty much just because of POENINJA. And I think POENINJA does contribute a lot to the problems of PoE in terms of what people think about builds. It really creates this stereotype of what's actually the highest damage build and what's actually the best build, because people really believe that numbers mean everything. Because when they look at it, I have so many people that tell me Cast on Crit Ice Spear is the best build in the game, or Flicker Strike is the best build in the game, or Elemental Hit is the best build in the game, or now Smite Aura Stacker is now the best build in the game, purely because of damage numbers. And a lot of this stuff is just incorrect, and that's just the danger of POENINJA and extracting information without being fully informed about what you're looking at. So you can see here, this is the guy with the 55 million POB, and you can see here his number is just 4 million. Now, part of the reason why is you don't have Trinity showing up. You don't have, so like here, when you import someone's POB, you don't have Trinity. It doesn't showcase the resonance. It doesn't have Nightblade because it doesn't have Elusive Tick on the POB. And it also doesn't have Rage. I think, wait, let's go check it out. So I can show you exactly what's wrong with the POB when you import something like this. The way you look at it, there's no resonance, and Trinity should be at 50. And then it doesn't have Brittle or Scorched on, and this is pretty much already going to be 30, and then like 12 or even like 8, you can say. So you can already see how much the damage difference is, and you don't even have Frenzy charges for some reason because you have Anomalous Blood Rage or something like that, and you don't have Elusive Tick. You don't give the Berserker any rage. So you can see here, just checking a few boxes already brings it up to 29 mil. And that's pretty much a huge difference. So that's why a lot of builds with Trinity, any builds using Secrets of Suffering, just flies under the radar, and you have people making these huge, wildly, like just inaccurate things saying that Berserker is less damage than Raider when it could not be further from the truth. And that's just something about POENINJA. It was the same way with Aura Stackers and Righteous Fire not being calculated, so everyone thought that CI was more damage than Low Life. And also, POENINJA also does this thing where people who have like an extra large cluster and they actually don't take it, they fill out every single point. So people will think that, oh, someone who has a lot of large clusters will have the best setup, and that's just so many times is not the case. So this is pretty much this Raider versus Berserker thing should be a cautionary tale into using POENINJA to judge DPS because of the configs that the API for POENINJA uses. For some reason, POENINJA hates claws, it doesn't use Nightblade, it doesn't like Rage for Berserkers, and it doesn't like Trinity. And that's just how it is, so just make sure to keep that in mind before comparing profiles for different builds. So overall, I hope this breakdown has helped out just to like compare all of the differences, because I know a lot of people talk about everything and whether Berserker or Raider is better. And in the end, Berserker is hands down better if you want damage and you want to attack faster. I mean, there's no way to really argue that. The defenses, I would say, are kind of a wash between having spell suppression versus having max resist. Both have a lot of armor. Raiders, some Raiders have a lot more evasion. And so it ends up being the two sides are pretty close, but not really, because Berserkers actually have Fortify, and they also have Berserk, which is 26% less damage taken. You can say that, yeah, Berserkers take 10% more damage, but you have 26% less damage taken from Berserk. And you also have 21% less damage taken from Fortify. So realistically, if I had to be honest, I would probably say Berserker is slightly tankier. And having the insanely fast attack leech also helps out a lot. And Berserker, I feel like, also scales a lot better in endgame with both attack speed and just general damage because of having all of these more multipliers. And the big knock on Berserker is the fact you can't freeze, you can't shock, you can't shatter. You could technically run Skitter Boss to get shock, but that would be a lot of tooltip and having like no longer having determination, but you could technically do it. But the biggest thing here that I think that people should consider when you choose between Raider and Berserker is the fact that the Raider is the smaller character model that is female. A lot of people actually want to play a female character model. And another thing is the fact that it is a lot easier to play. Like, you don't need to worry about having Berserk up, and you don't need to worry about maintaining your rage. And you could pretty much just only have to do left click Withering Step, put down your 1 or 2 totems, and that's it. And you don't need to do anything else. You don't need to micromanage your rage. So it's definitely a lot better for beginners to play. You can't really mess it up, and you can't really blame like, oh, you didn't have Berserk up when you put down the Vol Lightning Strike, so my damage is cut in like by 10%, cut to 10%. But if you want to have the better character in the end that feels super fast, you will probably choose a Berserker. The Berserker will do more damage, it will attack faster, it will whirling blaze around the map faster, and it will probably be a little bit tankier. But the Raider will have more than enough damage to do everything in the game. It will be easier or more chill to play, and it is a female character model. So that's pretty much the pros and cons. I hope that all of this has helped out everyone. But thanks for watching. I hope you choose to play Lightning Strike, because that is really the MVP. Lightning Strike is the MVP. The class you choose doesn't really matter. You just use Lightning Strike and everything will be fine. But thanks for watching. Hope you find more mirrors and exalts than I do, and see you next time. Bye.